listen. Listening. I'm listening. I'm being listened. You cannot see me as I'm listening, as I'm not watching at you. You. I'm listening to you. I think listen is the most intimate sense that we have as human beings.
Quite overwhelming because you let the other person really into you. It's so present, hearing the voice again and again, the sentence again and again. He is so much more than the person who spoke was aware of. So generous listening kind of means you hear more than the person speaking. You know more. Every little hesitation, if you would listen to what I'm saying now in a generous way, it can be shocking.
In terms of listening, the experience of being immersed in a situation where you have to activate all your senses, silence is often part of that experience. I would say changed very much my understanding of what it means to try and conduct, say, an exploration, how to move out from, say, the written page or other forms which were possibly more familiar before I started this inquiry.
I believe that the act of listening to and in the ocean is fundamentally important. The ocean teaches us also about the limitation of our sensory system that we rely on, right? A lot of our being is geared at looking and seeing as the primary sense. It's also an act of connecting, right? So many species in the ocean rely on sound, on location, on echolocation, to hunt, to find food, but also to find mates, to orient themselves and to communicate.
Listening, I think, is something that happens with the entire body all the time, and for me is a kind of primary mode of artistic response and responsibility. By listening to a space or to a place or to a person, one can sort of better understand how can I be in conversation with something. I suppose I see it as listening is the primary artistic activity, first and foremost listening. And through that listening begins the formation of a bond, of a relation, from which a response can grow. That's something that's in conversations, making yourself, making your entire being available for response. It's something that the world requires of us at this moment, to listen, and to listen carefully and deeply and fully, and find within us that capacity to respond.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Generous Listening Symposium at Teatro Piccolo Arsenali, organized within the scope of the Meetings on Architecture public program at the Biennale di Venezia, in collaboration with Vuslat Foundation. Our symposium will begin with the founder of Vuslat Foundation, Vuslat Doğan Sabancı, followed by the curator of this year's Biennale, Hashim Sarkis, and then leading artist Giuseppe Penone with Chus Martínez, after which we'll watch a performance by İnci Eviner. In the following section, we'll be hosting a debate between Chus Martínez, director Kenann McKenzie, and architect Francesco Bergamo, followed by a panel by Hashim Sarkis and Professor Caroline Jones. And finally, we'll invite all the speakers back for a Q&A session. So to begin with, I'd like to invite the founder of Vuslat Foundation, Vuslat Doğan Sabancı, to the stage.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great day. It's a delight to welcome you all to Generous Listening Symposium in collaboration with Venice Biennale of Architecture. Speaking of generous listening, I would like to start by posing a question to you. Do you ever, how often, when you're speaking, you feel interrupted or pushed to finish your sentence? Or if I reverse the tables, how often do you find yourself, catch yourself, trying to say what you want to say in a place where you ought to be listening? I'm sure many of you relate to this because we are all tempted to interrupt, because we care more about what we say and how we say than what we hear when we listen. But consider why we have 2 ears and only one mouth. Well, I can go in the whys and speculate for hours, but for the purpose of this meeting, I will focus on one function of listening, which is crucial, and that is creating connections. When we listen, we create connections, and we don't just create any connections. When we listen generously, which means engaging our hearts as well as our minds, then we create meaningful, joyous connections. Research says that people, are never happier because they have a bigger house, because they have a better car, or so forth. What makes people happy is family, friends, and the healthy, good connections, meaningful connections that they build. But today, we live in an era where speaking, all forms of speaking, is super glorified, whereas the power of listening is very much totally dismissed. It's all about how many contacts we have, the social interactions we have, and so forth. But what a paradox. Even in the abundance of this much interaction, we feel lonely. Loneliness is one of the biggest problems, diseases of today. Even mental health, deteriorating every year, every single year. It has reached some alarming levels, especially for youth. And imagine if we would connect to ourselves better, listen to ourselves better, to each other and to nature, do you think we would be feeling lonely? I'm sure we would not. And this is just on the individual level. What about in the societal level? In the societal level, the broken connections or the lack of quality of connections brings us to social exclusion, fear of the unknown, prejudice, even violence. And I would argue that the biggest damage of our connections lack of connections goes to nature. After the modernity, we started seeing each other superior to nature and separated from nature, which brought us to the current state of environmental crisis. As a former publisher of Turkey's leading daily newspaper, I dedicated a big portion of myself to facilitating conversations, especially with diverse communities. However, with this rise of social media, the role of media, as well as what we call success for media, totally changed. It became all about reach. How many people we reach, how many viewers, how many readers, and so forth. And this kind of overshadowed the importance of having good conversations with diverse viewpoints, with diverse people. Everyone started seeing them as a standalone media and acted so. Twitter became a channel of angry crowds. Instagram, super polished content. And everyone wanted to be more sensational, provocative, even divisive, to be heard more, to get more attention. I realized my idealism of media came to a dead end. I needed to zoom out and to clarify how I could serve the world better to engendering good conversations. I decided to take a year off, and it was in the midst of turmoil. And I intuitively embarked to a series of listening journeys. I wanted to get out of my comfort zone and listen to people that I thought were far away from my circle. And I went with no title and absolutely no agenda. I listened to women with conservatively religious backgrounds, lifestyles, but I also went to brothel owners in Anatolia and listened to them. I went to women who've seen violence in women's shelters, but I also went to prisons and listened to murderers who've committed homicide. In each of my listening experiences, I said I'd take a further step in becoming a better listener. By now, I know that listening is a muscle. And just like any muscle, you tone it by practice. And this is very important, but I gathered some more information about listening. And that is, you need to prepare yourself to listening. And that comes with a clear intention. Saying to yourself, committing to yourself, I am going to put everything about my ego, my mind, so forth on the side, and I will have the intention to listen to this person or to yourself, makes really a big magic. But there are also some important practical steps you can do. One is, of course, do not interrupt. And another one is, which I'm having a lot of difficulties with, is do not try to offer any solutions or fix any problems. Just listen. And then most of the time, maybe you realize your mind starts wandering. If you realize that, bring it back, because we all have that. Well, some of my listening experiences lasted just for a few minutes. Those were not successful on my side. Some lasted, though, for hours. Some of them were very informative, but with some of them, I went so deep that I started working and even inner work. In the end of each listening experience, my perspective changed. It shook my beliefs and motivated me to open a bigger space for myself to listen to myself. Now, I want to share with you one of those transformative listening experiences I had. It was a visit to a women's shelter in a low-income city, Izmir, in Turkey. For 15 years, I had been working relentlessly against domestic violence. We had designed a nationwide awareness-building campaign, and we had lobbied to protect the women who are seeing violence for legislation. We started the first and only hotline, and so forth. During all those works, many times I visited shelters, women's shelters. I talked to the survivors of abuse. But none of these encounters affect me so deeply as it did with Zeynep. Let me tell you a little bit about Zeynep. Zeynep, first of all, her real name is not Zeynep, but I will call her Zeynep because she is still under life threat. She had a very challenging life, a difficult life. She was abandoned as a child, and now she's in a women's shelter. Her difficult experiences at the shelter were very similar to the other stories I had heard, but this time there was something different. I was listening in a different presence, with a different presence. I had spent the entire day listening to difficult stories. And I had promised to go to this shelter, so I said, I will have to go. But I had absolutely no physical or emotional strength to give to her. As I was listening to her, I was just listening to her. No solutions, no agenda, no strength. And then an unusual thing happened. Zeynep, this petite, meek-looking woman, morphed into a giant as she talked. And me, I shrank into my whisper of myself. As she talked, the power dynamic between the two of us completely inverted. And it seemed as if I was not there to help her, to give her power, but I was there to get some of her courage for resilience. Her words transported me far beyond her story to the depths of my own story. And through our stories, even though we come from completely different lives, I realized how much common emotions and feelings we shared, especially as mothers, our love and our concern for our children. We have a beautiful saying in Turkish. I'm sure many of you who are Turkish know this very well, and that's listening with your heart's ear. It is, if you engage your heart, you go beyond the words. And for the first time, with listening to Zeynep, I fully comprehended the meaning of the phrase. And I said, I ought to define this, shape this, and globalize this. This is the background birth story of generous listening. Generous listening has the power to restore connections, broken connections, and it shows us that we're all one and the same, unique but one. It's impossible to become a generous listener without doing the work personally. So most of the time when we talk about listening, it's listening to the other. That's the perception. But I truly believe and convinced from my experiences that you've got to do the work personally. And nature, is this a sign? I spoke too long. So nature is also a very important part of it, because I found integrating these stories and making meaning of what I lived in nature. I learned to silence my mind and open myself to the unknown in nature. Strengthening the quality of our connections is an antidote to world's many problems, from mental health to otherizing to exploitation of nature to prejudice and so forth. Generous listening is an essential and a powerful tool to deepen our connections. If we agree on this, then we need to talk on how. How do we do it? How do we cultivate a culture of generous listening? Well, one of the most important steps is to bring awareness on it, is to build up awareness on it. And this is exactly what we're doing all together. And everyone that's watching us, listening to us virtually, we are elevating the role of listening in the world. So thank you for being part of this. And I feel very, very fortunate to start this journey with Giuseppe Penone, who has been writing and working on becoming nature since late 60s. His works and ideas are great inspiration to all of us. Thank you, Giuseppe, for your vision and for also sharing your work to be a symbol on our journey. Thank you. The second step is cultivating the culture of generous listening, is to creating listening spaces. Architects and designers, since a long time, have done great work on creating stages for speaking. Now, as Hashim Sarkis puts it, it's time to ask the question of how do we create spaces for listening? And I'm very curious, looking forward to listen to Francesco Bergamo's views on this. The third important step in cultivating the culture of generous listening is, of course, integrating it in the system so it's here to stay, so it's long-lasting. The most important system in the world is the education system. So we have collaborated with Tufts University in Boston on creating a generous listening and dialogue center. And the director of the center is here with us today, Kenann McKenzie. So I'm really looking forward on that discussion as well. Well, I hope I have convinced you on the importance of generous listening. Now I want to make my final point on the urgency of generous listening. Dear guests, as you might know, United Nations declared Sustainable Development Goals, 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Since then, these range from environment crisis to gender equality to income inequality, education. Since 6 years that it has been declared, it shows no, unfortunately, hope that it will be reached. So why is it that so many businesses, philanthropies, so many organizations, NGOs are working, have put their efforts in these 17 SDGs, but we are not able to take much step further? I'll take an informed leap of faith and say that it's not done because it's not done in a culture of generous listening. It's not co-creation, it's not collaboration. It comes with their own ideas to impose, and we cannot move forward. We have to accept this. We have to internalize this, that in every effort that we will do in this world today, it's intertwined. And without that collective thinking, which is super important for listening, we will not be able to find any results soon. So these are, of course, super big, audacious goals. But we can start with a very simple step, very immediate, simple step. And we can all make an intention to start listen generously, at least our intimate ones, or maybe some further away ones. So I welcome you all for being in this journey with us and sharing this notion of elevating listening in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'd like to welcome the curator of the Architecture Biennale, Hashim Sarkis, on Zoom.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Yeah? I go? Okay. I feel very privileged to be working on this Biennale, not just in partnership and with the generous support of the Vuslat Foundation in making this Biennale happen at a time when nobody was listening, when nobody believed that this effort could materialize given the crisis we were living in under the pandemic. It took faith, it took a leap of faith for anyone to understand that this Biennale is going to be possible and that it would be possible in different circumstances. It would be a different Biennale, but it will be an important one. The Vuslat Foundation listened and believed and helped us make it happen. So thank you, Vuslat, and thank you, Vuslat Foundation, primarily for everything you've done. But this Biennale would also not have happened had I, at least happened in this form, had I not been privileged to be part of discussions that led to the formation of the foundation at its inception. from early days in 2018 in Istanbul and 2019 in London, and many dialogues over Zoom that helped me articulate much more clearly and I would say generously the theme of the Biennale. The question, how will we live together, obviously has many dimensions that require thinking about how do we form collectivities, how do we form cooperation. And these do involve different instruments, including listening. But formed as I am as an architect, and architecture as a field does always focus on spaces of gathering, but the gathering is primarily about the eye, primarily about the voice, and never or rarely about the ear. In architecture schools, we teach first how to formalize spaces in terms of their visual qualities, connectivities through the eye, how people see each other, how they approach a space, what they see, their orientation and their organization of spaces is primarily based on the eye and the experience of the body, but led by the eye. The voice comes second, and we do teach acoustics, we do teach materials in terms of how they respond to sound and voice, but we don't focus enough on how space entices people to slow down, to be attentive to each other, to be respectful of each other. It's, for me right now, at least in my thinking, very difficult to understand how these qualities of generous listening that the Vuslat Foundation is working on and that Vuslat just expanded on earlier very beautifully, translate into space. We have ways to go in this direction, but I, again, here want to thank the Vuslat Foundation for putting these challenges in front of us as humanity in general, but also as architects. Over the different visits and brainstorming sessions, retreats with the Vuslat Foundation, these notions of generosity and listening somehow fermented in my thinking as I was curating the exhibition. And if there's anything I would like to share with you today in the space allotted to me, is how these questions really became fundamental to the thinking about the Biennale. As you may know, the Biennale is organized around 5 scales. How will we live together among diverse beings? Meaning, it is time for us to open up the space of architecture and the space of the world to not just other human beings, but other beings as well. To think of our own selves as being fluid in our identity, in our gender, in our ethnicities, but also to think of our connectedness with other species. For us to be able to live, we need to live together with other species. Otherwise, we are compromising our own existence as well, let alone that of others, which we have been doing forever. So we need to rethink completely the space around which our bodies exist and interact with others. As I've been working with the Vuslat Foundation and seeing how their program and ideas evolved, I began to realize that perhaps one way to think about these spaces in terms of interaction with others, maybe opening a space for the voice, maybe the space for the ear. But ultimately, these will translate, if we listen correctly, if we interact correctly, into emotive spaces of sorts, spaces that evoke certain emotions. And through this kind of emotive synthesis, we are able to open up architecture to these new possibilities. In terms of the space of the body and living among diverse beings, felt that the emotive space of empathy becomes extremely important to emphasize. And opening up the possibility of how space allows us to empathize, how space allows us to see, listen, and be attentive to others' needs and concerns. So as we go from the space of the body to the space of the household, and opening up the space of the household to other possibilities of houses, being not just about the nuclear family, but other forms of organization of the familial space, to the space of community and emerging communities, and trying to figure out how people's dignity and identity can be formed and reformed through affiliation with other communities, to working across borders so that the dominant identity of the nation state is complemented, is challenged, supplemented with other, in relationship to other identities. And then finally to the scale of the planet. How do we live together as one planet, as one humanity? Each of these requires a very different form of affiliation, a different emotive space, I would say, to connect. So over one of the conferences, I think it was the one in London with the Vuslat Foundation, the 5 scales for me became 5 emotive spaces. The space of the body becomes the space of empathy. The space of the household became the space of love. The space of the community became the space of affinity. The space of working across nations became the space of curiosity, projecting, reaching out to create a level of curiosity, but also respect. And the space of the planet became the space of humanity and universality. It is through these 5 emotive spaces that I thought through the organization of the Biennale, and helped me a lot in bringing the different kinds of projects together to go from an understanding of space in its materiality, its visuality, its dimensionality, to space as a possible instrument of evocation and encouragement of certain emotive relationships. For all of the above, and for hopefully the way that the work manifests itself as a form of building cooperation and collaboration among people, I want to thank the Vuslat Foundation for helping us really articulate this dimension added to architecture. Much work lies ahead in this space, but you have opened up a lot of possibilities for architecture in this domain. Thank you very much.
I'd like to invite to the stage now the leading artist, sculptor, and our keynote speaker, Giuseppe Penone, with historian, writer, and curator at large at Vuslat Foundation, Chus Martínez.
So, where to start? At the end of the day, when we talk about listening, we are not talking about something so different from perceiving or being in front or in the presence of an artwork. Actually, the history of the relationship that we establish with artworks is the history of reception. It's really not the history of broadcast. So it's really not very difficult to relate listening to the presence, being in the presence of artists and being in the presence of artworks. But actually, it's very interesting how in the last decades we have been insisting that this presence was not enough. That actually receiving and being in this companionship with artworks was insufficient. And we started a divide that has been accompanying us for many years, which is the divide in between the praxis and the theory, and it's also the divide in between the producers and the receivers. So instead of talking about being in the presence, we start talking about the production of knowledge. So even knowledge that is something immaterial has been described as having the logic of a common good that could be made, that we were doers of knowledge. And it took us many years, actually, and many efforts, mostly done by artists before, but we have a very scheme memory in the art world, but also younger generations to reclaim and to actually reprogram that language and talking about receiving and letting beside the production of knowledge, which is a singular, both words in singular, and moving into the plurals of the productions of knowledges by and then dropping production and just talking about knowledges, even indigenous knowledges, acknowledging the plurality, the diversity that exists in the modus of perceiving. And it took many, many years and many decades, and it's a great pleasure for me to be in the company of Giuseppe Penone, because I think it has been his work a major keystone, milestone, as they say in English, to actually make that turn. And that turn is a turn that it has been obvious inside a certain texture of the art world, but not to everyone. And I must say, and I was telling him that I've been experiencing an incredible interest and a new actuality of works like yours among younger generations. And I would start just by asking you about the trees and the trees in your work and the, you know, the non-symbolic relationship that you have with nature, but the one-to-one relationship that you establish in your practice as a sculptor with nature.
I started my work in end of '60, and it was a moment where the young artist was working against the convention of the art that was before. So the relation with the material and with the form was a relation that want to be related to the reality. This was the basic idea. It was, and the reality was a word that was very important at that time. For me, I was very young. I was in '68. I was 21. My idea, intuition, it was to work with something that I know better than other things, and it was the world that surrounded me in my adolescence, in my first year of, and the interest that I had was about sculpture, and the most simple things that you can do to make a sculpture is to touch something. When you touch, in the moment that you touch, you are equal. Your body and the things that you touch is the same. So with this idea, it was possible for me to do a work with clay, with marble, with any material, but always based on the idea of equity and of touch. And I tried to make visible this idea with a work related to the growth of the tree. I think that the tree, it was a fantastic sculpture in himself, because he memorized in his body all his life, and is a fantastic sculpture because he have the necessity of his life. So it was, for me, it was an example of sculpture perfect, and I associated to this example of sculpture my gesture that was just to touch the tree. So I made an hand in iron, and I put on the trunk of the tree, and the tree in the time he grew, and he make himself the print of my hand in his body, like the print of my hand in the clay. So it was this the basic idea. It was an idea of equity between the element, the material that we touch and the man that touched the material.
When I was a student, I had a professor of contemporary art, and he told us that in the classroom, and you said the word reality, we should talk about the pragmatics of reality, and those pragmatics should be only read through the conditions that affect the human, specifically labor. So good artwork, if you were a young Spaniard, it's an artwork that would be addressing in a direct way the conditions of the human under the lens of labor, how labor creates an exploitation, and that everything related to nature would be a distraction, and that nobody could consider nature a political substance. And I still remember that because for many years I was thinking that every time that I fall in love with something relating to nature, I was committing a sin. I was not being politically engaged, or I should not derivate or try to escape the real conditions that real humans were facing by going somewhere else. And many decades later, I discovered that there is no such dichotomy, that actually this binary is a binary which is a false one. But in the ideology of many of the teachings about the function, the good example of artists and art in our society, this has been excluded. And I'm asking you, how politically is your approach to nature, and how do you see it as well? Because you have been the maker of that substance. You made it possible for many of us to unite these two dimensions.
The fact that to work with with an element that was not used in that time in art, it was already a choose that was also a politic choose in a way, because you work with something that is neglected in this moment. So this was something that I have done. Probably I was not conscient of this, but I have done, and I feel completely and I follow this idea for all my life. So it was something that was very deeply my understanding of the reality. And this, the reality in a way, it became, if you consider the reality, the things that surrounded you, and you try to be connected with them, this is a politic action. And my work is and understood, I try to understand the reality that surrounded me through the language of sculpture.
But you also have experienced how the conditions of the reception of this work has changed a lot. I think we see now everyone talking about multi-species communication. So when you say to us that when you touch something, you are equal with the thing you touch, we understand it, let's say, in a much more deep dimension than perhaps 20, 30, 40 years ago, where the talk of interspecies was definitely not there.
It's true that it was very different, the perception of the function of the reality of the man and the perception of the other elements of the nature. But as I insist about this, I have done a work of sculpture. When you do a work of sculpture, you have to work with a material. If you don't respect the material, if you don't understand the material, you cannot do a good sculpture. So it was basic for me, this idea. And in that case, you have a kind of equity between the man and the material. And all the work that I have done, I try to do to follow the material in himself and to give the image that is inside of the material. So it's not an action that try to shape the material with an idea. It's an action that try to reveal the image of the material.
Yeah, and in your work also there is a dimension that I consider incredibly important relating to that, because as you said, you are not trying to superimpose a form in the material, but to figure out, to reveal, to talk, to have a conversation, or even a relationship, a very deep relationship with this material till a form appears or reveals. And there is nothing, let's say, mystical or even very metaphorical about it. It's a true process. It does happen, no? So it's like, you know, it can be read as a poetical act, but it also can be seen as something that happens indeed, no?
But it is also you have to, if I consider that time, I think always about 60, 70, there was an art that was not based on figure. The most interesting art was about abstraction and concept. With nature, you can introduce the figure in the art. So if I made a tree, I reveal the tree that is inside of a piece of wood, this is an image. Is an image, is not just is an action, and is an image, is a real image, an image of the reality that is inside of the material.
And I know that you have been also very interested in the relationship that there is in between voluntary acts and involuntary acts. So, in other words, in your work there is as much an interest for form as there is an interest for breathing. In form, traditionally speaking, in arts, is something that the artists create, perhaps together with nature, but you create it, and it's something that is voluntary. It's, we may want to create or to reach a form, but in breathing we do it without thinking about it, and there is something involuntary. And this is a level of reflection that is not very present in contemporary discourse, but you know, if I send you back to Aristotle, already there is an incredible reflection on the importance of knowing the difference of these two worlds and relating them and putting them together. And perhaps you can talk a little bit about this question of breathing, or these involuntary moments that cannot be seen by the mind. They don't pass the mind.
It was another aspect of my work. It was always based on the idea, on the thinking of to touch something. When you touch something, you give an image. The image is the print of your hand, of your body. This is an image that is not interesting. It's an image that is animals. Is an imprint of a body that it can be done by everybody. But it became interesting if you try to understand what is this image, and if you reveal to the people, to the other people, the image. So it became an example of image that it can become something that have a relation with the image of art too. So it's the understood of something that is usual, that is not voluntary, that is just something that happened, like reality happened around us. And to reveal this, it was something that was similar for me to the work that I've done with the growing of the tree.
And also the choice of the materials. I think the trees that we sometimes see by you, they are actually trees that are trees made of wood, but they are not, the wood is not present in themselves sometimes, they are transferred into bronze. So how do you make that decision? How did it came in your work at all to make that decision of making that transfer?
To use
bronze to produce the trees. Some of them,
bronze.
I think. Yeah.
No, this was because it was a long history in a way. I have done a work that was about potatoes. Potatoes was, and I put potatoes in the ground. When they start to grow, I put it close to the potato, the little potatoes, the mold of a face, and the potatoes had the shape of the face. So this was a work that I have done in '77, and to preserve this work, I have done bronze. When I casted it in bronze, I realized that there was a big, very strong connection between the vegetal and the technique of the foundry, because in order to have the bronze piece, they have to do a kind of branches that will be to alimент the sculpture with the material. So it was like the structure of a tree, but reversed. The tree was attracted by the light, and the bronze casting was done with the gravity force. What was the reverse of the grow. So I think it in Gaudí, that when he have done the Sagrada Familia, he produced a model in his studio where he reversed the curve of the architecture. So it is the reverse, exactly the reverse of the grow is the gravity force. So this give me the idea to produce bronze tree, because the tree is the weight of the tree is supported by the life of the light, and is against the idea of the gravity of the depth. So this contrast between the grow and the gravity force is also the reason of the stone that is on the piece that we have in the Arsenale.
And also in the piece that you did for the Documenta, in Documenta 13, in the park. And I still remember when the tree arrived, and it was the first piece of the Documenta, so it inaugurated the Documenta. And it was located in the Auer Park in Kassel. And I, observed from the window of the office how people started going to the tree, thinking it was a real tree, but wondering if a real tree would have a stone on top. And then they came because of the stone, so the stone was like a lighthouse. It was attracting people curious because of the stone, thinking that it was just a normal tree, but some miracle happened and it was sustaining a stone. And then the very moment that they put the hand on the tree, noticing that the tree was warm, because in a warm day it would kept, and even in not a warm day, it kept the temperature of the climate. And then in the realization of the temperature of the object, the faces of the people change. And I still remember people like being with one hand on the phone and with the other hand attached to the tree. Just this idea of communicating twice, like calling somebody but touching the tree. So.
Yes, but the piece that we have here installed in the Laguna, for me, have also a meaning and a relation very deep with the town, because the town is founded on tree, on branches that is under the building, so they support the stone. So it is something that have it was a fantastic opportunity to can show this piece in the Laguna. For that reason, for me, it was really a fantastic possibility, and I have to thank the foundation of Vuslat that give me this opportunity.
And also you said to us that there is a history of a disaster behind that tree in the Laguna, no? Because it's not common, or I would say it's the only tree I've seen of yours in the water and in the salt water. And there is the reason of that disaster that happened in 2018 in the Veneto, if I don't remember it wrongly, no? That destroyed 14 million trees.
Yes.
So it's also a relationship with
Yes.
that. And I want to end by being polemic. So, you know, now when you look at the landscape of the art world, there is almost no day that you don't see an exhibition with the word nature on it. And everyone is, in a positive way, of course, claiming that relationship, claiming that possibility, and also finding out spaces in the social and in culture to relate the common citizenship with the question of climate justice, but also with the possibility of an entanglement with nature in general. But how do you feel, and how did your work change, if it changed at all? Because this is a complete different situation than some decades ago. I think it was not like that at all.
But my work, I think it don't change, is the perception of the work, of that change. So it's not my point of view about the work that, or I change some way to do the work. Is the perception of the reality that surrounds the work today that give a meaning to the work that perhaps I had not think it in the past. So it's.
But don't you think that your work changed at all? Yes, something. Meaning.
You do a work, and after the work will keep the meaning of the people that look the work. It's like when you read a poetry. You give in the poetry, you can read your experience inside of the word that is brought from some other else. So the work, the artwork, it's okay and it's good when it have this quality to can give an answer or can give imagination to the people that see the work.
But you also made it possible. I must say that if it would not be for your insistence on certain materials and the way that you understand sculpture, certain conditions that we are experiencing and certain enthusiasm, even in younger generations, would not be possible. I do remember the first, experiencing your work in one way, and also I remember the words of Caroline Christoph Bakargiev saying that the Documenta 13 would be the Documenta of the animals and the trees, and the journalist wrote, this is the first Documenta that's gonna be done for the dogs. So it was, it is art that creates the conditions of a transformation, and you did that. So, if it wouldn't be for a continuous insistence in a certain way of trusting, because it's trust that made you go for it. You trust the material, you trust the tree, you trust the wood, you believe that they convey something, that it carries a system. So the whole system, not only because of your work, but thanks to your work a lot, it has been changed.
This is again the reality that surrounded us, that perhaps produced by the activity of the man, but that he changed the nature, he changed the elements that surrounded him. But men have done that to survive and to make the possibility of surviving, of the number of people that is today in the world. So it's very difficult to tell that is a big mistake, this, because the way to support to make the possibility to the people today existing to live, to eat, sure, it destroyed something, energy, other energy. The problem is to find a kind of balance between this reality, because we have not to forget that men are nature too, and for nature in general, if man is existing or is not existing, nothing changes. It will be existing in another kind of life, or also a stone is have a life in a way. So it is not a problem this for the nature. The problem is our, if we want to survive, we have to be careful and to protect the nature, and this is something that everybody today understands.
And how important is the dimension of listening when you hear us talking about listening? How important it is in your work?
Listening is very important, but as I come back to my origin in terms of work. When you touch something, you listen to the material that you touch, because you feel the kind of the material. You have a relation with the material, and this is a way to understand something that is not perhaps but is existing under your hand.
And just to wrap it up, but what is fascinating you at the moment, or what is something that you would like to do, or you are thinking, or you are, curious about that you have not done yet in your work?
I don't know. Each day I do something very, very simple, perhaps just a line with a pencil. And this is also, it can be fantastic too, if it's something that can give you an understood of the reality of the material and something that surrounded you. So it's not, I have no project, global project. I have just a very normal process of life.
I think we couldn't end with better words, and I admire your humbleness, because it's not humbleness, it's actually an attitude that we should all assume, which is, to concentrate and admire the small gestures and possibilities that surround. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite contemporary artist İnci Eviner to the stage.
Moving beyond my identity as an artist and wearing the hat of a noun, I want to listen to my own works as someone else or nobody, and through this listening to unveil visual representation. This exciting process becomes a tool to experience the act of truly listening to my video works as things that are thrown into the world independently from me. Thus, to liberate my work from the many systems of meaning and their weight that I, the artist, loaded to them, intently or not, and provide it with an opportunity to talk itself, is only possible by transformative power of listening to them. In a way, personifying a kind of other, I want to undress my own work. I want to allow the work to exist in nature and life by itself, as an independent being, erasing my face as of an artist, and thus refraining from the ego, opened a new horizon for me. Identity was enforced. Identity was multiplied. Identity was passed on. Identity was effaced. Central identities hit a wall. Central identities hit a wall. Third person, singular, let's call it Ubi for now, although there is not enough evidence to prove Ubi's existence as a person. Let's give it a name until proven otherwise. Ubi. I ran into nursing modern fall in the morning of the day after, the 19th of October 2021, before the clouds have had time to build a wall in front of things. I found it at the top of the tree, waiting, while I was on my way from the studio to home or walking backwards from home to my studio. I have been taking these walks probably since 2010 as one of my meaningless daily acts. The act of walking backwards, the way that the path moves away from me at each step really calms me down and thus postpones the frustration that comes with the obligation of walking to the arriving at somewhere. Anyway, coming back to the story, the video work titled Nursing Modern Fall, produced by artist İnci Eviner, 2012, insists on meeting up. This insistence that came after all these years made me very anxious. I must listen to what it has to say, and I already feel the trauma that this act will cause. The act of listening, Ubu. To overhear the discomfort of this one-way communication, in which the speaker does not recognize us as a subject, and hence does not directly address to us, but we forcefully try to take part as a raw and formless being. Push us to meddle and pair in vain. What we hear with images, thinking doing this would give more meaning to our lives. So what we have to do here is to go the other way around and listen to what the images are whispering to us. But while doing this can I, Ubi, become not a subject, but an empty body, searching for its sound or voice? Could listening find itself a new space of being without getting interrupted by seeing? All of these are to make listening active and liberated from all the prejudice. Let us start. Action number 1. We have to start somewhere, but I have just denied the visual guidance of the image. So, where should I start? How am I going to find my way in this uncanny planet? This work is going to find my way in this uncanny planet, which no sound corresponds to its source. Listening to Nursing Modern Fall, I realized that the sound wants neither to be a complement of a visual world, nor the sound of the object. To start listening, for the act of listening first, to freely realize itself, we have to save it from where it is stuck, in between language and body. Language and body. Action number 2. When I close my eyes and open them, the thing in front of me starts to move, and I, lacking all sense of direction, roll over towards the scene. I am happy to be hypnotized by the tick-tacks, and murmurs of these functioning things, to be drifting, and to voluntarily give up my free will. The things that I am hearing here turning me into a creature that is swimming in the water, flying in the skies, and still carefully avoid naming what I am hearing, proposing them objects to hold on to, and put myself through a considerable test. The condition of being a subject, Action number 3. It is not possible to predict what is to come once a piece is missing. This missing piece has always fiercely gotten under my skin. What would have happened if I start this adventure with phantomology by my side? Crossing this train of thought as a bold and formless creature who is comfortable in its own skin, open to adventure as if everything it wants will happen, I had to listen to the insistent cries of artists within me talk. Every time within me talk. Every last work is known to be hers. I do not want to be unfair to her and thus open up space for action 3A under action 3. The artist, İnci Eviner. I am actually quite interested in how the modernist constructs of identity, ideologies are reflected in architecture. The way that architecture has affected social and gender roles and identities is also equally interesting. I have spent my whole life drifting between the progressive ideals of modernism and traditions. I started nursing modern fall, imitating the sketches of certain architects who are important for European cultural identity. But after some time, I abandoned this rational flow and continued to work in whatever way I wanted. The resulting architectural plans were freckle, stuttering, and funny. Funny. While by drawing them as a woman, tried to understand how the architectural plans shape my intellect. I also learned how to deal with them. One of the most important scenes, with great jealousy, I tried to imitate Auguste Perret's plan for Champs-Élysées Theatre, which indeed stands at the very center of this video, but in the middle of my drawing process, I changed my mind and left the rein to the demon coming in front door ajar. Thus, Perret's concrete structure turns into a stage for my madness. For a moment, let's put the statements by the artist on hold and continue to listen to the work. Following the months, I reach a sick man at the center of the Perret stage, with his back facing us, having his knee curved into a ball and lying on the table. He looks resented and given up. Before taking his place at Rembrandt, the anatomy lesson, as a cadaver amidst the murmurs, he hopes to take refuge in the infinity care of the nurses. And the woman, 4 beautiful nurses, 2 of them sneering. One shakes the hand of patient, maybe out of affection or excessive hatred, to an extent that she decapitated him. And the head is quickly reborn from seas as a mythological strong athlete, and lays back again on the table and awaits the 4 beautiful women. The cruelest of nurses look sarcastically into our eyes. The only way to avoid this glance is to listen to her. I do not comply with the role given to me. My desperation fell into me as a heavy melancholy during this play. The bitter venom of my sadness spilled into the sea. I am sly and clever, rebellious and sexy. I throw all things that you have associated with my rights back at you. My place is on the stage. Hop, hop, hop, la, la, la, hop, hop, hop. I came to Philharmonic plays to dance with Apollinaire and Picabia, for my love to Perret. Ho, ho, ho, lie, lie, lie. At this moment, I hear a moan of pleasure, a woman pleased with her masculinity, loving herself amid sparkles. The rustling of her dress creates a tidal melody. With the moan, the old songs will not console you. The girl-boy will lie down, watching herself to become a boy-girl. Hey, hey, hey, become a boy-girl. Hey, hey, hey, lo, lo, lo. Action listening number 3. This time I am listening to the sound coming from the ceiling. What is the animal that spins around itself in circular motions and spins and spins, lighting up the world as it spins? The sound from the ceiling is like a shout of victory, out-taking the weak voice of teenage girl. The coward gender of humanity, the sparkling source of the hypocrisy of pleasures, start with the innocence of socks at the tip of the foot, and tip of the foot, and tip of the foot, and. The desires from the feet to the top of the head rush, rush, to drown in the stars of a disco ball, to drown in the stars of the disco ball. Action listening for the underground. I put my ear to the floor. Footsteps again, the sound of a fierce struggle. The woman stands up to the womanhood. Woman to the mother, woman to the boss, woman to herself. Foot hook, leg hook, violence class pad. Flows from the earth to the bunker's underground. The underground sound of a snake brushing the soil to avoid meeting its own venom. Purr, purr, purr, purr, purr. The snake changes its skin and puts on glittering dressing gown. Bunkers, the leaking swage and water leaks potential waterfalls. The disaster floats waiting for their turn. Lies, the sign of the girl who got suspended on earth at the very last moment. Ah, ah, ah. Far below, a rabbit woman in one-person cabin. No one knows when they become each other. Another one-person shelter. A guest thinks that she's counting the stars of an underground sky. Another shelter, a disabled person, moving her head constantly from the left to right, then right to left, and repeats. The scene splits into two ones. The only monosyllabic word she knows is heard. No, no, no. The retired and enthusiastic rabbit girl leading a group of proud workers. Action, listening, number 5. Using Pere stage as a trampoline, I jump into the void, trying to hold the image for my life. The artist within me again applies pressure to my ears to take the floor. Much, much, much, loop, loop, the artist. In nursing modern fall, I wanted to create a parallax order, to create awkward spaces in which different points of view can transform the object that is looked at, and the scenes that continuously repeat are tried to be taken under control or healed by mad women, nurses, sportsmen, lovers, treasure hunters, national athletes, doctors, and architects. Could of them cure the demise of modern, the belief of progress? Came here loudly alongside freedom and then turned shamefully into a whisper. You hold the ability to construct life? It's a lie. The Palladio staircase helps us to connect to different elements of architecture. The architectural pieces echo in space the sound of rusty iron tanker rests ashore. The sound travels from Kalamış to Gümüşsuyu, Venice to Istanbul, twice. Again, 3 minutes later, the sound travels twice, once full and once empty, full, empty, full, empty. Action listening number 6, a concert of Aircraft Engine Factory, 1940. A group of young patriots suddenly starts to chant an anthem and the Pratt and Whitney Aircraft Engine Factory. One of them carries a silver flag, another enlightened society with a disco balls. A hard-working and popular, virtuous patriot leads his crowd. The whole crowd is singing together a barely audible anthem. Bir hızla kötülüğü, geriliği boğarız. Karanlığın üstünde güneş gibi doğarız. We break the evil, backwardness in hassle. We rise like the sun over the darkness. I suddenly rise to find my place on fancy pangolin skin seat of the aircraft. Yes, I cannot believe what I am hearing from where I stand. You, me, and the earth. You, me, and the pangolin seats. You, me, and the ants. One by one, I count the planes and my pockets are full of ants. Stop, stop, stop. Action listening of labor. I want to fail onto the space between the ordinary disorder of the disappointed order of things and excessiveness of the destruction and madness. The girls have their back to the sun. Are they trying to erase the lines on the map, or is this a scavenger hunt? The promises of the map are discovery, power, happiness, welfare, and richness. The sound of labor, tick, tock, tick, tick, tick. Where will the girls carry the G-string beneath their workman suits like a flag? When we will the tick-tocks of labor expose the enemy? When does the tick-tocks of labor kill a young girl, Action bodily sound number 8. When I am alone, I can trace the moment of sound in space. Like an arrow with a sharp end, sometimes it goes through the body without piercing it. The moment of the lips of the girl who is reading a book here, in the middle of silence, reminded me of words kissed on lips, smile, heart, ringing, greeting, loving, smelling. When I pay attention to the sound, I hear the can-can dancing. Boarding school leakage girl gets her foot stuck in the garbage can. Upstairs from the old concrete columns of nursing modern fall, a garbage can, a bad memories can. To give your food to something or someone in a dream will make your enemies happy. The dream breeder, you are wearing snakeskin pajamas with your foot in the silver bucket. You are waiting for your wedding night for your survival. Action bodily networks of sound. Number 9. Maps. The sound of the foot walking on soil turns into the lust to possess. A satellite map, the interest of knowing the world, the networks of talking over the world, taking over the world, and the cosmic sound of the invisible rhizome that connect with them very thin threads. Now, Here in Venice, Italy, let's listen to the sound coming from the ground, under, and the sky. One of the girls I know, she usually lives on the streets, believes that she can ride scale on like a horse. This is just funny, it's so funny. The years in 1951, Festival of Britain, Skylon by Powell and Moya and Royal Festival Hall. The sound is at the intersection of language and body, but it is neither a part of the language nor the body. Let us not forget the girl in her underwear, raising the disco ball in her hand to the sky, who tries to remind this maddening crowd of their citizenship duties. If I had to identify with someone in this video, I would choose her, stuck between womanhood and citizenship. With the knee-high socks, I ask from where a gun band stands. How do we listen to a body that is not a citizen? Departing from the language, I plunge into murmurs with heartfelt love.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome back on Zoom Hashim Sarkis, with the professor in the History, Theory, and Criticism section at the Department of Architecture from MIT, Caroline Jones.
Thank you very much. These have been amazing acts to follow for us. And I do want to highlight the importance of the lyrical spaces that were opened up just now in the two presentations that preceded. And also, if I may extract something from the Penone piece in relationship to the theme of the Biennale, but also to its arrangement as a space. Giuseppe, we've had a big challenge throughout, not just myself, but previous curators, in dealing with Sansovino's amazing but very overwhelming Gajandre structure. And every time anyone tried to step into that space, Sansovino elegantly from a distance defeated them. What is beautiful about your piece is that it maintained a very modest dialogue with the Gajandre, but an elegant distance by staying outside and by acknowledging its own size in relationship to that humongous structure, maintaining what one can call a dialogue of unequals through the modesty that you've introduced and as a result conquered the space with your modesty. So thank you very much for that elegant introduction of the Vuslat Foundation into the world of art and architecture, but also for your help in solving what has been a perpetual problem for curators, which is the Gajandre problem. I'm very honored to introduce Caroline Jones to this discussion. Caroline needs no introduction. She's been very present in the thinking about art and its role in society throughout her writing, particularly in her work on acoustic art, brings in a very interesting dimension and a history to this endeavor that we're embarking on with the Vuslat Foundation. And Caroline has also partaken in the curation of the Future Assembly project in the Biennale, in the Giardini, which is an attempt on the part of 6 co-curators to think of what would it take to expand the General Assembly of the United Nations after the 75th anniversary, and to introduce non-human members in the Future Assembly. I will let Caroline speak to this, but there's also another dimension where Caroline is very much invested and involved in the project of generous listening, which is in her leadership of the Transmedia Storytelling Initiative at MIT and the collaboration there with the Vuslat Foundation. So on for all of the above and for all of these different possibilities and potentials that Caroline's work opens up. Please join me in welcoming Caroline to the virtual stage here.
Can everyone hear me? Don't care so much if you see me, but hoping you can hear me. Thank you so much. It's a great privilege and an honor to be part of this conversation with curators and artists whom I so deeply admire. I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and I want to optimize for video and for sound. And hopefully I have the bandwidth to do this. Can everyone see and not yet hear, but at least see my screen? You'll tell me if you can't. So I wanted to focus with great interest in my own heart on the potential for generous listening within the complex and often digital and often virtual forms that artists are using today. And MIT is, of course, actively teaching this material. And I want in particular to just touch on a few signal examples of what we might expect to emerge now that we are implementing the V Foundation's Generous Listening Fellowship for our amazing graduate students. So these are just thumbnails of materials that I'm going to be speaking about incredibly briefly today. And, you know, at the last minute, of course, listening to Chus and Penone, I had to add a couple of slides because I'm an art historian. And I'm very moved by the fact that our own brain processes hearing in a similar mechanosensory way as it processes touch. In other words, we don't, I mean, you might think you hear sound directly, but in fact, you're hearing a touch of vibrating airwaves, vibrating material on a very physical tympanum, right, in your eardrum. So I was very moved by Penone's discussion of the relationship to the potato, right, which does become these extraordinarily beautiful cast objects, because the depositing of an iron version of a hand around a potato is a way of listening to the potato growing. It's a way of extending human touch into the more than human time frame of the vegetal, which is so different from our forms of attention. So with that inspiration, I'm going to simply proceed on this discussion of our MIT initiative in transmedia storytelling, which involves a lot of different groups, which I'm not going to explain here, but merely to show you this constellation, which I think of as an ecosystem of different kinds of species of pedagogical and learning entities, and their very different affordances within this system. Now, of course, we're thrilled to be working with the Vuslat Foundation on this new a fellowship for generous listening. And this is just very new. We've just released the proposal to students and the applications are pouring in. We have encouraged them to think about these areas of generous listening. Spaces of listening, which of course, as a School of Architecture and Planning, we're extremely engaged with. Novel ways of listening, so the technology that is part of MIT's name, the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The transformation of reception through listening, and I'll touch on that. That's where the heart enters the ear. Listening to the more than human or the non-human. And of course, part of Vuslat's heart is listening to each other. So how are these likely to roll out in these proposals that are just now coming in from our amazing graduate students? A guide can be suggested by my collaborator, Dr. Shadi Zaman. It feels like the Turks are taking over these generative frames. Shadi, in his teaching with Fox Harrell on virtuality and presence, already encodes listening as the first exercise. Students are challenged to create a sound portrait of themselves listening. What are the sounds in their world that make them as subjects? So this spatialized listening is already a part of our ecosystem, and now we're going to move into this challenge for the students to begin thinking about the spaces of listening, because sound waves are always encoded by the spaces that they reverberate within, the resonance that provides us with information about how we navigate this world. So what are the roles of digital and physical spaces in listening? What are the opportunities presented by transmedia for crafting spaces of generous and generative listening? We can imagine some of the responses will be like the videos that were produced in the first generation of transmedia storytelling narratives. And I'm going to try and play a little bit of this video. I'm going to speed ahead to a moment around 4.08, where we have the students who made this virtual reality encounter with the spaces of protest in the Black Lives Matter marches in Manhattan. So you have to imagine it's a pandemic and students are stuck in their rooms, they can't go anywhere, and they're actually bringing these free expressions of anguish and community engagement, right, into an augmented reality of their own space, right? So they're encountering these journalistic video clips and narratives from their own living room. And I'm hoping that if I can move to this one, we can get to listen to it. It's a Black nurse who's speaking about her efforts to save her.
Pandemic into another one. We fought COVID, and that was the worst 3 months I've ever experienced in healthcare. And then to come into something like this and witness what you witness on the television that we all saw happen to George Floyd. When I go to work every day, I don't discriminate. I have combative patients, we have psych patients, we have mental illnesses, and we restrain people without having to hurt them or kill them.
So for me, this was a very, very powerful artwork that a team of students had produced across 3 of our different departments. It was powerful because the stated position of our mainstream newspaper journalism was the protests on the street are destructive, they're vandals, they're destroying things. But when you encountered these vernacular video and sound files, you realized that people were putting their lives at risk during a pandemic to go and be together. And there was joy in that. There was exultation in that. There was purpose in that. And it was a corrective to mainstream journalism that I found extremely powerful. There's more, because listening within space, embodying a narrative, is a way of triggering human memory. Shadi Zaman in his PhD project has studied the effect of spatialized encounter with media versus a flat screen version of it. And he's done the psychological studies to prove that visitors to these virtual spaces remember what they encounter much more within this spatial encoding of sound and memory. We can also imagine novel ways of listening, because our students are already coming up during the pandemic with ways of measuring spaces acoustically to thereby listen to urban activity and its lack thereof, okay? So these are 2 contrasts between June and July, when the pandemic had basically shut down public spaces, versus when they became open again, entirely measured by a spatialized sonic database. So this is the kind of thing our students are interested in doing, and what the Vuslat Foundation Fellowship should be able to do is encouraging them to make narratives of meaning, of cultural connection, and of transformation out of such data gathering activities. Listening to each other. This is, of course, crucial. And I happen to know that one of the proposals coming is from a very interesting architecture student who worked with me in a landscape seminar and was moved to go through the American park system and provide the voices of Native American peoples who had been eradicated from these ancestral lands in order to make spaces of visual contemplation, right? This is a profound example of how the auditory can provide voices that have been silenced by the construction of a landscape sublime. I'm very excited about these proposals, and I'm looking forward to amazing work as a result. transformation through listening, we're heading in a direction with our Department of Urban Studies where we can welcome the MIT graduate Debbie Lockwood, who's going to be speaking about her book, 1001 Voices on Climate Change, resulting from her bicycle trip across the country to speak with people about their narratives of how the climate crisis is touching their lives. So Debbie prompts us for this amazing session coming up in a couple of weeks. What is deep listening and how is it relevant to the climate movement? What languages can we use to draw people into stories of climate change rather than push them away? Her actual polemic is around the inadequacy of data and data visualization to help us get to the heart of our human behaviors in relation to the planet that is our home and our only place to be. Listening to the more than human is thus a very important part of my own interest in having this fellowship really make a difference. And I'm looking to students whose dissertations I'm part of, such as the amazing Media Lab PhD student Nicole Louillier, who is listening to cosmic, indigenous, and natural sonorities, including our own local marshlands, for which she has produced sort of marsh symphonies so that we can imagine the incredible work of oxygenation that goes into these territories that were formerly thought of as wastelands to be filled in and create land for urban occupation. So thank you, Vuslat Foundation. We are incredibly excited to begin this work and inspired by your leadership in generous listening.
Caroline, thank you very much. I want a cue, given that I'm so far away like you, I want a cue from the organizers as to how much time we've left to have a discussion. Can someone send me in the chat or on my phone?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, fantastic.
Okay.
Caroline, you raised a lot of very interesting examples, and many of them highlighted actually one challenge that we haven't discussed yet in the space of listening that we're trying to create. First of all, I think what you brought to the table also, not just in terms of the wealth of examples, but in terms of the understanding of what it takes, is the complexity of a network that is necessary to build in order for this exercise to be meaningful. And what I admired about the Vuslat Foundation from the get-go is its ability to, since its inception, build a network, to imagine itself not as being in an isolated space, but about feeding and supporting and connecting to the network, from the Biennale to MIT to Tufts to Istanbul and other locations. It's one of the few foundations that don't have one home base at their inception, but many. But that opens another challenge, which you highlighted yourself, which is that when we listen to people speaking in different tongues with different areas of expertise. And you highlighted in your talk how this transmedia storytelling is about different media speaking to each other and across. And also that we are not just different individuals and species, but we speak with different tongues. And so can you speak a little bit to the space, but also the challenge of translation that is involved in this process of transdisciplinary listening?
I love the question. And of course, some entities speak without tongues at all, right? So this is part of our delightful challenge. I will again allude to one of our remarkable students. So a Media Lab dissertation, a master's work that I was privileged to be part of is with my colleague Ekene Ijeoma in the Poetic Justice Lab at MIT's Media Lab. And Ekene has a beautiful project listening to the voices in many languages, counting numbers as part of the US Census Project, which famously undercounts the voices of non-English speaking immigrants. And my student, Nina Lutz, challenged herself to provide a sign language equivalent of this auditory counting, right? Sign language is a profound space of translation for the differently abled human, right? Which cannot hear the counting of the other languages, but speaks a profoundly visual language of hands and bodies in motion. So this, I kind of want to throw it back to the inspiration of Penone's work, which is very, very important to me personally, because I was at MoMA when he did his amazing drawing of touch curving out of the wall. Maybe you remember that, Giuseppe? Anyway, it certainly changed my life. So this idea of the haptic, the touch, as a place of relation, is now translated through a video of hands speaking that will then be translated further into understanding of what number that is. In other words, we can use AI, we can use machine learning as a place of compassionate translation. And this is how I want to tweak the technology in Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I always want it to come to the place of the human rather than taking us to the place of the cyborg or the robot or the machine.
Thank you very, very much, Caroline. I think our 3 minutes are out, but this was an amazing 3 minutes response. Thank you.
Thank you all.
I'd like to welcome back Chus Martínez, and Director of the Generous Listening and Dialogue Center at Tufts University's Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life, Kenann McKenzie, and architect Francesco Bergamo.
Consecutive. So we have heard so many good thinking about listening, and we don't have much time, but still time enough for a short conversation with two really experts in the subject matter. During the Zoom time, as I call it, the Zoom era, I was kind of totally suffocated by the fact that I was surrounded by grown-up people complaining mostly. So I kind of managed to make an open call and create a small children council for curating an exhibition that was virtually made in Iceland. And in one of these encounters that took place on Friday's afternoon with my curator colleagues, that they were in between 10 and 12, we watched a video by a marine biologist talking about how the language of whales happen. And then he was explaining in that video that actually the scientists discovered that the whales also listen to each other, because when the baby whales are talking, then they talk baby whale, and then the mothers, which are not next to them, that are a little bit apart, sometimes repeat baby whale and do another sound that is not baby whale. So the baby whales understand that they are being corrected, and they repeat what the mother said, but they switch again to baby whale. So we were really surprised and were like totally mesmerized. And then one of the children said, "Are you all very surprised?" And then we were all very surprised. It's like, wow, baby whale, and they, you know, they have been listened and corrected. So somebody listened to them, the mothers, as mothers do, and correct. And then one of the children said, like, yeah, this is really not surprising, but I am very surprised by the fact that baby whales, when they are born, they don't talk perfect baby whale. They just talk wrong whale language, and then they learn how to, and it's through the process of listening to each other that, and in the Zoom room, we were all kind of agreeing that the big surprise is that we humans couldn't actually realize that there is a process of learning that is going on in all species, even in ourselves, but we have been not exposed enough to the process of learning, to what it demands, what it is, to the beauty of it, to the moment of repeating, doing, and being a baby whale till you become a whale, and hopefully perhaps you don't even grow up, and then you just listen to the child inside you. So I thought it would be a fantastic question to Kenann, actually, to ask what does it demand to introduce those processes in the very process of learning, the process of listening, and how can we actually invent new spaces that are not based in providing the right answer only or at all?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really grateful because I feel like this is such a courageous space. I'm really grateful to the foundation for making this space. I was really enjoying your story. As you could probably tell, I have young children myself. But I was actually sharing a story with a colleague this morning here about spaces where we just listen to children. And one of the opportunities I've had to see that is in something we call the documentation studio that we had at Wheelock College for about a decade. And the activity actually originated in Italy here, ironically, where the idea was to have children play or resolve something among themselves and just watch and listen. And then it's documented by video so that you're not interacting with them. And then later, the teachers learn from the students how they think about solving things as simple as how to share something, how to create a solution for a toy or an issue that doesn't work. But for some reason, we begin to move away from that after we leave early childhood. We actually make less space for children to have unstructured time. So playing starts to seem unnecessary. Recess, free time, social time starts to seem less important. But what we're asking ourselves now, particularly as we're looking at issues of mental health crises, are where do we make spaces for student voices, for student input, and for unstructured time for children to actually interact with each other, and in a way that is more equitable, that isn't about the adults in the space structuring all of the conversation and all of the interactions. How do students give voice to what it is they need? And how do we reintroduce that after the time where we think it's cute because it's play, but when it's actually about a feedback loop that starts, where we do work with them, they share, we co-create what their learning experience is like because we actually value their voices in an equitable way. So I think part of the role of this center is trying to be able to center this idea that we don't stop paying attention when play is no longer the mode of communication. Sometimes we don't hear the things we're expecting or want to hear, but as we start to center the feedback and we listen more to young people and we listen to our future leaders, I think we will really make more progress in actually understanding that unstructured spaces and just listening actually will help us to really understand what is necessary. And we've heard that all throughout the morning about knowing what's necessary for the ocean, for us to survive, for us to live. But young people and our future leaders have a lot that we need to hear. But creating equitable spaces for them to do that, I think, is going to be really critical.
I think it's great what you are just saying, because so many times we hear us talking about things that do not work, complaining about the systems and the structural problems that we just pass on. So when we talk about education, we are normally talking about the transmission and the teaching. So we still talk about the fact that we are, even if we don't like the world as it is, we don't seem to have any problem to just transfer it again and again and again to others. So as you are saying, it's super difficult to see a space of transformation if transmission is top-down and if transmission is just perceived as a transfer that does not happen from the children to us. And what are the challenges? Why is that not happening so much? What do you think are the barriers that we need to, dissolve in order for this taking place?
Well, I would say one of the challenges is something that I see when I'm working with adults, when we're doing professional development, for example. One of my colleagues made a point the other day by saying, we sometimes reach a point in our lives where we've decided we're done changing. We have decided that we have decided what is going to work for us and our families, and anyone who comes to challenge that, including our young people, is unwelcome. And maybe we don't consciously do it, but there's a point at which we just like, this is just who I'm going to be. This is who I am. And we make a line of demarcation between that and future ideas. And so certainly if you think there is an inequity in terms of authority and power between you and young people, the idea is that you can protect that boundary. You can decide that there's nothing else for you to learn from them, right? But just as you were sharing in that really beautiful narrative around what we learned about another species and the reaction from the young people, everybody was in awe because part of what you're doing is actually engaging in something new. And sometimes I'll ask in my conversations, when was the last time you changed your mind? And sometimes people are stumped. They can't remember the last time they changed their minds about something that was really important to them because they have decided their minds are fixed about certain things. So young people are often asking us to engage them in a way that might change our minds, and for some people that is uncomfortable. But we can also have those moments of inspiration and awe when we do allow them to really share with us. And so that is something that I think we all are working on, but it is a continued challenge when you're looking at a space where people may feel like their boundaries about who they are and who they've decided to be is fixed and somehow being challenged by hearing something new or hearing a different perspective.
Yeah, and the other day I was having a conversation among my own staff, which are art teachers, and I was saying that for me, or in my opinion, the street revolution gave birth to the body revolution. So, you know, in '68, and not only, the taking of the space, of the public space, of protesting, of taking your body to that space and protesting, has been giving birth to something even better than that, which is seeing your own body as something that can be transformed, can become a hybrid, can be fluid, and the revolution takes place in the sense that in a non-binary world, you could be unstable in an identity, under an identity point of view, that you can change not only once, perhaps now we are seeing transitions that we just understand from one point to the next, but those fluidities in identity may come again and again and be recurrent in super productive ways, because at the end of the day, the question of the fluidity in gender, for example, corresponds to the desire of morphing, of becoming, as you say, of learning. So if you learn through life, you may not be the same gender, the same identity when you are born as the identity that you acquire later on. So the right to transform and being socially perceived in that transformation is actually a space of pedagogy, a space of seeing a positive transformation in the eyes of others. And you, Francesco, you have been, and you are a researcher in sound ecology and fluidity, and the unmaterial is a super important part of it. So the interaction in between things we see and things we don't see, but perceive and transform and alter our mind and consciousness. So what do you think are spaces still that, you know, how do you see that we can transform public and also private spaces towards these more, encompassing experiences that we are all kind of wishing for?
Thank you for your question and for the invitation as well. I would like to start a little bit from afar. I changed my mind many things about what I could say today to contribute to this debate and to this presentation, and I changed my mind many times during this event because I've been listening and listening. I changed my mind. This is something that often happens to me. I don't know if it's a fortune or not. Most of the cases it's not really a fortune, I have to say. But I was thinking when you, Chus, was talking with Giuseppe Penone about one thing that regards the sculpture, and that is also an important, still fundamental exercise of problem in philosophy and in perception, which is it has to do with the definition of sound, but it also implies listening, because there is this, the question is, if in a forest a tree falls, but there is no one listening, does it make a sound? So there are very different answers to this question according to disciplinary fields, to philosophers. We can find different answers also in recent books about sound and about listening. Two recent books are François Bonnet, The Order of Sound, and an Italian book by Elvira Di Bona and Vincenzo Sant'Arcangelo, which is on sound, with a very philosophical take. I leave aside the problem of thinking about what a sound is, but the act of listening is anyway what makes things present to us. But I think that after visiting this sculpture and listening to you, there are also other questions that arise. So, are there sounds, but is there the possibility of listening also if the tree doesn't fall? Or when it has fallen? And is the tree capable of listening? In this case, of course, I think we agree that a tree is capable of listening, and we can think about listening in many different ways, of course. But I think that these metaphysical problems really resonate with many of the things that have been said this afternoon. And about your question, I think this is part of the answer. So being open to listening, but also being aware that everyone and everything around us is listening. So being aware of the context and of what Gestalt psychology calls the background, because the tree that falls is the figure, but there is also the background which causes maybe the tree falling. I experienced a little bit, if I'm going too long, please stop me. Okay. I've experienced a little bit the question that you are giving to me, because as a student of architecture, I realized that almost no one of my teachers told me about how to take care of how the spaces could sound and could provide a designerly approach to interaction with the space, with the materials, and also with the other people inhabiting the space, unless it is a concert hall, maybe. I started to investigate by myself somehow, and I discovered that there were not many books about this, but today there are a lot of books about this. There are many colleagues who are working in this field, in some cases struggling also to find their own position, because somehow this kind of studies is considered, let's say, borderline, at least in Italy. The same goes for, I think, some of my colleagues with whom we are trying to build a research unit at UAV, the university where I'm currently teaching as an assistant professor. So some of us are still struggling to find our own position from different disciplinary point of view. But I think that research and education also in the university is one important place and one important take on your question. So we see that students' interest is growing towards sounds. I see it even if I teach drawing. So my students at the first year draw by hand, so they just start observing things. I think that observing also can be maybe considered as a synonymous of listening in the way we are considering it right now. I think one important thing is to try to make them aware of the relations between visual and oral culture, for example. We all know that we live in a mostly visual world, not only, obviously, but we have more instruments, more tools to understand and criticize the visual artifacts around us than oral artifacts. So it's much easier to be deceived by sound. And this is one thing. And the other important thing, I'm finding it in the arts, especially when the arts meet communities with a political, in the most noble acception, of course, way. And I'm thinking about artists and very few curators like you who are considering the practices of listening for the people and for the community. In Italy, they are not the only two associations, but there are, I think, two important associations that are doing this kind of work, which are Standards in Milan and Mu in Cesena. They are composed of mostly musicians and artists, but with very small devices somehow. We could call them poor devices if we want to force a relation to the very important work by Giuseppe Penone, which is important also for these persons, of course. Very poor, like a stone, like a piece of wood, and trying to explore the possibilities of those materials, but also of common spaces. For example, by taking workers who have been working in a factory for 10, 20, 30 years to listen through microphones and to interact by listening also with the environment which comprises persons also around them.
But I have a question for both of you, and you know, going back to the words of Vuslat at the beginning in her introduction, everything has been designed, and both of you have a lot to do with design in the sense of education is a design for a transmission, architecture and space is the design for a position, for a presence, and the perception of the importance of those that are in that space. So everything is really designed for an idea of having an answer and broadcasting it. The answer needs to be right, the broadcast will be successful. Leadership is based on the possibility of uniqueness. Exceptionality is everything that distinguishes and makes the idea of the possibility of following, of having a vision, for example. So almost nothing in the narrative of the Western culture is defined for co-creation, is defined in the space of actually relaxing, because if you relax, you are losing the time. And there is no space in education for almost anything else than the library contest. There is the contest for those that they know, and those that also through social media and through their own work and so on need to deliver their own exceptionalities so that the system fishes them out and distinguish in between those that they are going to make it from those that they are not going to make it. So if you are stum or if you don't deliver, then the system automatically erases you or slows you down in the process of being present in the social. And that's a fact. And that's a fact that worries me a lot. And I think that therefore I perceive the idea of generous listening as a fundamental transformation into the very restructuring of our metaphoric, symbolic, and factical ideas of what power is, and if power is sustained by individuals or by communities. And I defend passionately the second option. But Kenann, Francesco, what should I do? I think, how can I, for example, in education, in an art education context, or in a cultural structure context, introduce that dimension? What are the tools and what are the possibilities and the methods and even the interlocutors, which are not many, actually?
Okay, well, I know we're short on time. We'll have a long conversation about this, but what I do want to say is that as much as we bemoan the pandemic, it has given us a really unique and wonderful opportunity to rethink and redesign. And some of the things that are ailing us that we are talking about, particularly with young people, around mental health, around socialization, I can't tell you how many people have said to me while I was here or at home that children are returning to school, not really being sure how to interact with each other. These are all indicators that open up the dialogue around what we really need to be healthy. And I would argue that although we're part of a system, for the most part in Western society, that values production and all the things you mentioned, and quantifying everything, that we are having a pushback of sorts, energetically, metaphysically, financially, in many ways, where people are saying, I cannot participate anymore. So it really isn't always about pushing back intentionally. We are a part of an ecosystem. We are a part of nature. And so if we go against our very nature, we suffer. And so oftentimes what we respond to in our human experience is suffering. And when we see the suffering of children, when we see the suffering of workers, we start to take notice, and then we do listen more. And so there is a unique opportunity here to do more listening, to not just what is being said, but we have a term I used to like, but I heard it here today. There's the voice of the voiceless. You also should pay attention to what you're not hearing and who you're not hearing from and why, and think about that. These are all unique opportunities so that the what to do, like how do we introduce more health in terms of time, in terms of what we consider resources, and how do we stop only wanting to value what is quantifiable? Part of that is we have been forced to go slower. We have been forced to notice that we have to value other things besides just production. And if we're noticing, we can see that some of those answers are happening organically. So I think this is an opening to do that. I think this is an opening that's allowing us to do that. And if you want to think about any silver linings, which I think there are some in this pandemic, I think that is one of the gifts that we have been made to pay attention to some things that we wanted to pave over by just being more productive. And some things require that we rest and pay attention. And I think that if we are willing to do that, we will start to be a healthier overall ecosystem of humans and other entities that make up our space. And we'll want to be a part of that in a healthy way.
Very true. Francesco?
I think that there can be interlocutors. I think it's just difficult to find them in some institutional contexts. I'm thinking specifically about Italy, but not only, of course. I think that besides this, maybe they just need to emerge, I don't know. But one of the things that some people are struggling to do in their own little way is building spaces, I mean it metaphorically mostly, for listening to each other, getting in touch, communities which live in the same neighborhood but don't meet. Building also spaces for the conflict, which is often left aside almost anywhere, possibly, maybe even in the arts. Most of the times when there are the art talks, everything seems beautiful, but not always things are really beautiful. It's not the case, of course, but I'm just thinking about your question, because I think that you are already doing much, and what I would stress out of your work, I think our work, it's not always easy. It's not easy for me, at least, is to be listening continuously. It's very difficult, of course, but it means being open to always merge what we are doing with the possible lives of the people we are dealing with, constantly negotiating our approach, being, you were saying it before, being open to change our approach, to change our mind in respect of the people we have around us. It's something that I'm using a term which, if there are musicians, may not appreciate, or some maybe may appreciate, which is we are always improvising. I'm thinking about specifically a conference. I've read the written text by one of the most important percussionists, which is Seijiro Murayama. He this talk at the Centre Pompidou, if I'm not wrong, some years ago, which title was Improvisation and Life. He's an improviser. He knows really well what he does. He's perfect in some ways, exceptional. But what he does always responds to the place where he is and to the audience. So it can never be the same, because it's always negotiating second by second what is happening when he's playing or teaching with the persons and the space around. So I think that this openness is an attitude, an exercise, and I like this adjective generous, because obviously this attitude could have many aims. One could use it to become stronger, to make the other more frail, but I think that the idea of doing the best that we can to consider ourselves and also the other species as a community is what we can do. Just an attitude, but I think it can make a difference.
Yeah, very wise words. We are running out of time, but I was wondering if Vuslat and perhaps Giuseppe could come on stage, even if there is not much time for anything else, at least to appear together.
Thank you very much for all the speakers. I would like to invite Vuslat and Giuseppe Penone and İnci Eviner on stage for some closing remarks. I am the director of the Vuslat Foundation, and thank you for joining us at the Generous Listening Symposium today. We would like to hear your questions, but if you can please send them via social media, via @GenerousListening from Instagram, it would be great, because we would really like to hear from you. If Vuslat and Giuseppe Penone and İnci can come on stage for closing remarks, that would be fantastic. Yes. Just, yes, to be on stage and to say goodbye.
It's like a family picture. İnci, don't skip that part. We do talk, but it's only, we don't have much time because we need to unfortunately close, but perhaps there is a sentence or a thought just to close this. And you know, you are the initiator, so perhaps you have something to say that we can take home.
I really want to deeply thank each one of you. I mean, with Hashim inviting us on this initiative and really encouraging and supporting us when it was just an idea out there, and making it, having us, you know, speed up our way into the real world, meeting with you, Chus, and Penone with his very much generosity, sharing with us his art and making it a symbol to bring it to life. İnci, it was an amazing, amazing performance, and also Kenann and Francesco to be here. But most of it, most important of this, for you being so patiently listening us and being on this journey with your hearts, with your passion, with your enthusiasm. This is I was always thinking this is a huge big rock, and in order to move it, we need either a magic like Penone's tree or a lot of effort. But yesterday a colleague of mine said, no, think of it as different. It is a ball up on the mountain, a snowball, and with all the efforts that are compounding and combining together, we can roll it faster and bigger. And that image I really like. So I want to keep it in my heart and mind and share it with you. Only with your efforts we can roll this snowball bigger and faster. Thank you very much. Make an intention to generously listen today. Thank you.
So thank you so much. So we close it here. So
You would like to say something?
yeah, Giuseppe, you want to say something?
No, I have to tell you something that perhaps you don't know. I am deaf.
You are deaf?
I am deaf from one ear. Yes. So I am really I appreciate a lot to be a keynote in a listen.
I really like Italian humor. İnci?
Thank you for listening, and also I am very happy to listen all of you. I'm very proud to be here and to be part of this listening. Progressive ideas, many very brilliant ideas. I'm very happy. Thank you for listening.
Thanks to all of you.